Mill tried ruining my life, so I exposed her lies and told everyone about her secret affair. Now her husband is divorcing her and her affair partner has also fled the country with. Hey, Reddit, I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but here I am, and I need to get this off my chest. So, a bit of background: I'm in my late 20s, married to an amazing guy, and we've been together for several years now. We've had our ups and downs, but I love him and we've always been able to work through things. We're at that stage in life where we're really starting to settle in and think about the future, building a home together, getting our finances in order. All that. I've always had a decent relationship with my Mill mother-in-law. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual small talk when we would visit and holidays spent together. You know, casual chit-chat, family dinners, and an occasional coffee when she was in town. No big drama or tension. I assumed we were getting along just fine. But over time, things started to get strange, and her behavior shifted from curious to intrusive. At first, it was little comments that I tried to brush off, telling myself she probably didn't mean anything by them. Remarks like, "You're not getting any younger," whenever the topic of kids came up, or unsolicited advice about balancing a career and a personal life. Even though I hadn't asked, she'd make these offhanded comments, always delivered with a smile, like, "It must be so hard to keep a marriage alive with how much you work," or "Don't you ever worrying about being too independent?" At first, I chalked it up to her being nosy or overly familiar, but the more it happened, the more it started to feel deliberate. The questions became more pointed, like, "So, are you and your husband on the same page about kids? Or is it just you who's unsure? And don't you think a stable home is more important than chasing promotions?" Every conversation seemed to have an underlying tone, like she was fishing for something, some kind of flaw or crack she could point out. It didn't stop there. She started making comparisons that felt less like innocent chatter and more like calculated digs. She'd talk about how she and her husband always made decisions as a team, or how they'd sacrificed so much for their family. The implication was clear. She thought I wasn't doing enough, wasn't prioritizing the right things. At one point, she even said, "Marriage isn't just about loving someone. It's about knowing when to compromise," with a pointed glance in my direction, as if I was the poster child for selfishness. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it, always in that sweet, almost patronizing tone that made it impossible to call her out without looking like I was overreacting. And when I tried to set boundaries, she'd laugh it off, saying, "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm just trying to help," or, I only say these things because I care." What really started to bother me was how she'd subtly bring these comments up in front of others. If we were at a family gathering, she'd casually mention something like, "Oh, you know how career-focused she is, she probably hasn't had time to think about kids yet." And everyone would laugh as though it were a harmless joke, but it wasn't harmless to me. It felt like she was painting this picture of me as someone who didn't have her priorities straight, and no matter how I responded, it always seemed to backfire. The worst part was how sly it all was. None of it was overtly cruel or nasty, but it was constant, a steady stream of subtle criticisms and digs, all wrapped up in a facade of concern. It was exhausting trying to navigate conversations with her, knowing that no matter what I said, she'd find a way to turn it into something to question or critique. What had started as harmless curiosity had evolved into a pattern of undermining me, and the more I noticed it, the harder it became to ignore. I think the real shift happened when I got a new job. I'd been working hard to build my career, and this new opportunity was a big step forward for me. I was thrilled about it, and my husband was supportive, which meant the world to me. But as soon as I mentioned the promotion and how excited I was to take on this new role, Mill's tone completely changed. She suddenly became very vocal about her opinions on my work-life balance. She started making unsolicited comments about how I should be taking care of my husband instead of focusing so much on work, and how I should be more focused on being the traditional wife She said things like, a woman's first priority should always be her family. And I never worked a day in my life after I got married. And look at how well things turned out for me. Your husband deserves more than just a wife who works all the time. It was honestly so frustrating. I didn't expect this kind of reaction from her, especially considering she knew how hard I'd been working for this opportunity. But there she was, with these judgmental remarks about how my priorities should align with what she thought was best. It made me feel like she was diminishing everything I had worked for. At first, I didn't want to make waves, so I just bit my tongue and didn't engage, assuming it was just a generational difference. I thought maybe she just didn't understand how important this job was to me or how much effort I'd put into getting it. But as time went on, the comments didn't stop. They started getting more frequent and more personal. For example, she once said, "Don't forget, your husband is the one who will always be there for you, not your job." To me, it felt like she was subtly telling me that my career wasn't as important as her idea of what my life should look like. I tried to ignore it, but it started to weigh on me. I started feeling suffocated, like I couldn't make my own decisions without her casting doubt on everything I did. But things took a darker turn when she started gossiping about me behind my back. It wasn't just a few casual remarks anymore. She was actively spreading lies to my husband, other family members, and even our mutual friends. I first started noticing when my husband would come home and seem a little distant, a bit off. At first, I thought maybe he'd had a tough day at work, but then it started to happen more frequently. He would casually mention things that didn't seem to add up, like how his mom had told him that I was neglecting my responsibilities at home because I was working too much. I couldn't believe it. She had gone as far as calling me selfish for wanting to have a career and putting myself first sometimes. At first, I thought maybe there was some misunderstanding, but it quickly became clear that she was deliberately planting these seeds of doubt. She didn't just stop at criticizing me for my career choices. She began making passive-aggressive remarks about our marriage, suggesting that I wasn't supportive of my husband's career or that I was somehow holding him back. She would ask him things like, "Don't you think your wife is a little too focused on her job? Doesn't she ever think about you and your future?" I felt blindsided. The worst part, it was all fabricated. I had always supported my husband's career choices, and we had never had issues when it came to prioritizing others' needs. But Mill was clearly trying to twist things, painting me as the problem in our relationship, all while making it seem like I was the one putting work before everything else. The more I thought about it, the more it became apparent that she wasn't just being an overbearing mom anymore. She was actively trying to create conflict between us. It was like she was trying to drive a wedge between us, using subtle manipulations and half-truths to make me look bad. After a while, I realized this wasn't just her being concerned anymore. This was something more insidious. She was intentionally trying to control the narrative about me and our life. She wanted to make it seem like I was an awful wife and daughter-in-law, and it didn't matter how hard I tried to keep the peace. She was going to twist every situation to suit her agenda. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding or a difference in opinions. This was manipulation. It was her way of asserting control over my life and our relationship, and I was not going to let it continue. But here's where it gets really crazy. About a month ago, I found out she was having an affair with a guy from her work. And this wasn't some harmless flirty lunch kind of thing. I'm talking about a full-blown, long-term betrayal of her husband. It had been going on for months, if not longer, and she'd gone to extreme lengths to hide it. She was sneaking around, making up elaborate excuses for her absences, and lying to her family about where she was and who she was spending time with. At first, I couldn't believe it. I mean, for someone who was so vocal about my responsibilities and priorities, it was the height of hypocrisy. But the deeper I dug, the worse it got. She wasn't just cheating. She had been using the money she was supposed to be saving for her family and her retirement to fund this guy's lifestyle. expensive gifts, lavish dinners, even trips all on her dime. She even went as far as secretly transferring a huge sum of money into his account, money that her husband had been trusting her to manage for their future. It was mind-blowing. And to top it all off, this guy wasn't even loyal to her. He ended up skipping town, flying out of the country with all the money she had given him, and completely cutting off contact with her. She was left high and dry with no way to get her money back and no one to turn to. Now, the real kicker. Instead of taking responsibility for her actions, she tried to gaslight me. She somehow twisted everything around and made it seem like I was the one causing problems in her life. She told my husband and her friends that I was too controlling, that I was making up lies about her, and that I was out to ruin her reputation. It was unbelievable. Here she was, caught up in this huge scandal of her own making, and she still found a way to paint herself as the victim and shift the blame onto me. She even went so far as to claim that I was the one spreading rumors about her affair, even though I hadn't told a soul at that point. I wasn't going to let that slide. If she wanted to drag me into her mess, I was going to make sure the truth came out. So I started gathering evidence. It wasn't hard. She was careless and left a trail of breadcrumbs everywhere. I found texts between her and the guy, bank statements showing the transfers she made to him, and even a recorded voicemail where she outright said she was leaving for good to be with him. It was all there in black and white, undeniable proof of everything she had done. I compiled everything and sent it to my husband and all her close family members. I didn't even feel guilty about it. I was tired of her lies and manipulations, and I wasn't about to let her ruin my life to cover up her own mistakes. I wanted everyone to see the truth for what it was, so I exposed everything. There was no going back after that. The aftermath of this revelation was nothing short of explosive. The moment I sent the evidence to my husband and Mill's close family members, everything unraveled for her in ways I don't think she ever anticipated. At first, there was complete silence, like everyone was trying to process the sheer scale of what they had just seen. But then, the storm hit. Her husband, my Phil, was absolutely devastated. He had no idea she had been unfaithful, let alone that she had drained their finances to fund her affair partner's lavish lifestyle. I think what hurt him most wasn't just the cheating, it was the betrayal of trust on every level. He had always relied on her to handle their family's finances, and to find out she'd not only lied to him but also jeopardized their financial future. It was too much. He confronted her immediately, and from what I heard, the argument was brutal. He moved out of their house the very next day and has already filed for divorce. Mill's affair partner, the guy she had been willing to throw everything away for, had vanished. She tried contacting him, calling, texting, even emailing, but it was useless. He had fled the country with all the money she had given him, leaving her completely stranded. Without him or the money, she was left to face the consequences alone. She had no savings, no real plan, and no support from her family. Speaking of her family, they were livid. My husband was shocked and heartbroken when he saw the evidence. He's always had a good relationship with his mom, so finding out what she had done and the lengths she went to in order to manipulate him and our marriage shook him deeply. For a while, he didn't even know how to process his feelings. He was angry, disappointed, and embarrassed. Eventually, he told her he needed space and decided to distance himself completely. He told me he couldn't believe how toxic and deceitful she had been, and he apologized for ever doubting me. Other family members were equally appalled. Her siblings and cousins, who had long viewed her as the pillar of the family, were left reeling. Many of them were in disbelief at first, unable to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the one who had lied and manipulated so brazenly. But once the evidence came to light, there was no denying the truth. The disappointment ran deep, and one by one, they began to cut ties. It wasn't just the affair that disgusted them. It was the calculated way she had betrayed not just her husband, but everyone who had trusted her. The more they reflected on her actions, the more they realized how far she'd gone to maintain the illusion of innocence while throwing others under the bus. Her siblings were especially hurt, feeling blindsided by someone they had always looked up to. They expressed their anger not only at the betrayal but at the fact that she had involved them in her lies, dragging the family's reputation through the mud without a second thought. Cousins who once admired her charm and poise now saw her as someone who would stop at nothing to protect her image, no matter the cost. The weight of their collective disappointment was crushing, and it left her increasingly isolated, her network of support crumbling with every passing day. MIL tried to do damage control, but it was too late. She went around telling anyone who would still listen that she had been misunderstood, twisting the narrative to make herself look like the victim. She claimed she was under immense stress, that she had made a mistake, and even tried to pin the blame on others for pushing her too far. But her excuses only dug her deeper into the hole she'd created. The more she tried to explain, the more transparent her manipulation became, and soon, even those who had been sympathetic at first grew weary of her excuses. In a desperate attempt to regain some control, she reached out to me, accusing me of overreacting and blaming me for ruining her life. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying that if I had just stayed quiet, none of this would have happened. But I wasn't about to fall for her tactics again. I blocked her immediately, refusing to let her drag me back into her web of manipulation. For the first time, she was forced to face the consequences of her actions without anyone there to shield her from the fallout. Now, she's completely alone, drowning in the consequences of the chaos she created. Her husband has filed for divorce, and her affair partner has disappeared, leaving her to deal with the wreckage on her own. Her friends have distanced themselves, unwilling to be caught up in her lies, and even her family wants nothing to do with her. The woman who once held court at every family gathering now sits in silence, with no one to listen to her justifications or excuses. Even my husband, her own son, has stepped back from their relationship, unable to reconcile the mother he once adored with the person she turned out to be. Her isolation is complete, a stark reminder that no matter how charming or powerful someone seems, their actions will eventually catch up to them. She's living in a house that feels emptier by the day, surrounded not by the family and admiration she once enjoyed, but by the echoes of her choices. The fall from grace was swift and devastating, and the person she destroyed the most in the end was herself. As for me and my husband, we're finally moving forward. The whole ordeal brought us closer together, and he's made it clear that he stands by me 100%. It's been a tough few weeks, but honestly, it feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I don't have to deal with her toxicity anymore, and I can finally focus on building a life with my husband without her constant interference. At the end of the day, she tried to ruin my life, but in the end, she only ruined her own.